This is the third and last video of our series on the history of reported UFO sightings and extraterrestrial encounters. Today, we'll cover the most significant incidents from the 1960s up to the present day, so be prepared for plenty of rumors, conspiracy theories and misinformation. But it will be a fun ride anyway, so are you ready? Well then, engage! The first famous UFO case in the 1960s was the Hill Abduction. Betty and Barney Hill were an American couple who lived happily in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. On the night of the 19th of September 1961, as they were driving home, they noticed a shiny light in the sky. They stopped the car to observe it better and quickly realized that it was a saucer-shaped UFO. The thing came towards them and the Hills were then able to see several humanoid shapes staring at them through the spaceship portholes. At that moment, the Hills became telepathically aware that the aliens wanted to abduct them, so they jumped into the car and fled. However, they soon began to hear an unbearable screeching sound which made them fall unconscious. Later, they woke up with fragmented memories and the feeling that a long time had passed, as if the brains had been scrambled.
I suffer from short-term memory loss.
When they informed officials at the nearby Peace Air Force Base, they were told not to worry, that all they had seen was planet Jupiter, perhaps combined with some unusual atmospheric effects, and maybe a few martinis. Still, Betty was not convinced, so she contacted Major Donald Kehoe. You might recall him from the previous episode, a retired military officer who is now the head of the NICAP, a UFO research organization. Around this time, plenty of civilian groups and associations linked to UFOs were being founded, including MUFON in 1969 or the British Bufora in 1962. Regarding the Hills, Betty told Kehoe about the horrible nightmares she had every night, as well as her perception that strange things happened around her. Added to this was the fact that Barney began to suffer a horrible depression. Eventually, in an attempt to unlock some memories of the abduction, Kehoe recommended that the Hills should undergo regressive hypnosis. So in 1964, Dr. Benjamin Simmons began with the sessions, and soon the Hills remembered that a group of 12 aliens had dragged them out of their car and subjected them to all sorts of horrible and invasive experiments. These creatures were described as small, grey, with large heads and huge eyes, and wearing some sorts of uniforms. And as you might expect, after these reports were made public, grey aliens became the new fashion. In addition, Betty also remembered a map she had seen on the spaceship which showed multiple star systems. When she recreated the map, it apparently represented the Zeta Reticuli star system, which is probably why many future abductees cited Zeta Reticuli as the origin of their aliens, leading them to be known as reticulians. The Hills case became very famous, partly due to the numerous interviews they did, but also thanks to The Interrupted Journey, a bestseller based on their story published by John Fuller in 1966.
So boring.
Many people did doubt the whole business and said that the Hills probably imagined it all, perhaps under the stress of being an interracial couple, quite unusual in the USA back then. But they always maintained that they hadn't suffered any problems in that regard. Furthermore, researcher Martin Cotmere suggested that those memories retrieved under hypnosis might have been influenced by an episode of The Outer Limits, which had been broadcast a couple of weeks ago before the session, specifically the one titled The Bolero Shield, as it appears to have several points in common with the reports. It is a well-known fact that this type of hypnotic treatments often generates false memories, based on involuntary suggestions from the therapist or the person's subconscious. Meanwhile, in the 1960s, the US Air Force continued to run plenty of secret experimental aircraft operations. We can mention the development of the Lockheed SR-71, better known as the Blackbird, a long-range surveillance aircraft capable of reaching Mach 3, which is 3 times the speed of sound. And the US government didn't only conduct experiments with aircrafts, but also with people. We are talking of course about the infamous Project MKUltra, which was supposed to be a top-secret operation run jointly with the CIA in an attempt to control human minds, develop telekinesis and all sorts of stuff. It is said that they experimented on human beings, including torture techniques and all sorts of drugs that induced altered states of consciousness. Kids, don't do drugs. We're not going to start delving into this subject because it requires an entire video of its own, but if you do believe in any of these, then perhaps you shouldn't read The Catcher in the Rye, as rumors said that the passages from this novel were used to activate hypnotic commands in the subjects.
Kill John Lennon! Kill John Lennon! Kill John Lennon! Kill John Lennon!
And now let's travel to Montana, specifically the Maelstrom Air Force Base, where they monitor nuclear warheads and where in 1967 an unusual UFO case took place. It all began when the personnel at the base observed some lights performing strange maneuvers in the night sky. The entire base was put on alert, and they soon realized that the 10-minute-man intercontinental ballistic missile that they were in charge of had suddenly become deactivated. Whoopsie. Fortunately, as fast as everything had started, it was all over. The flying lights vanished and it all became calm. Since there was no consequences, the incident was classified as top secret and quietly swept under the rug.
Is there anything else I can do for you?
At the same time, science fiction TV series were becoming increasingly popular. The Twilight Zone began airing in 1959 and was soon followed by The Outer Limits in 1963. I loved both, and if you want to watch them, many episodes really hold up well. That same year, the BBC began to broadcast its classic series Doctor Who, and then 1966 saw the premiere of Star Trek, which eventually became a massive franchise, and nowadays a bunch of rubbish in my honest opinion. Now, back to ufology. In those days, grisly new types of phenomena began to take place. Animal mutilations. The first case widely reported by the media was that of Snippy the horse in Alamosa, Colorado, 1967. Its owners found the poor animal dead with lots of precise cuts all over its body and with its head and neck completely devoid of any meat. And to make it stranger, there was no blood at the scene, as if it had all been absorbed somehow. The press soon found many more similar cases with dead sheep and cows. Some blamed cryptid monsters, aka legendary creatures, like the chupacabra from South American fables. But of course, it took about 1 nanosecond before everyone started crying out, "Alien experiments!" Now, let's talk about the Kecksburg UFO incident. This took place on the night of December 9th, 1965 at Kecksburg, Pennsylvania, when hundreds of people saw a large fireball crossing the skies. Then eyewitnesses at the small town of Kecksburg reported that the object had crashed at the nearby forest. According to these witnesses, the UFO was shaped like a bell or an acorn. The army quickly cordoned off the area and later explained that it had just been a meteorite impact. Nevertheless, it appears that some people found pieces of metal scattered around the area, leading to theories that what really crashed there was a Soviet plane or an artificial satellite, specifically the Cosmos 96. Others believe it was the continuation of the Nazi Flying Bell project, conducted in secret by the US.
Good one.
2 years later, in January 1967, we have the abduction of Betty Andreasson, a lady who lived in South Ashburnham, Massachusetts, together with her 7 children. One night, as the parents were visiting, all the lights in the house suddenly went off, and as they gathered in the kitchen, they saw a bright pink light shining through one of the windows. Afterwards, they also saw what looked like small creatures walking around the house. The next day, everything appeared normal, but from that day onwards, Betty began to have visions and nightmares in which she saw threatening humanoid creatures. A decade later, in 1977, she decided to undergo hypnosis in order to find out what the heck had happened that night. And it turned out that after seeing the night visitors, the entire family had been paralyzed by aliens who had entered the house and abducted them. They were all taken aboard a spaceship and subjected to strange experiments, and afterwards the alien flew them back to their planet, where Betty said that she had met God himself, no less. Apparently, he told Betty that she had been chosen for a very important mission, and that those aliens were in charge of helping humanity to overcome their self-destructive tendencies. However, judging by our current state of affairs, we have to conclude that either the aliens were a bunch of incompetents, or that Betty was high on something other than life.
What the hell have you people been smoking out there?
By the late 1960s, new theories had begun to arise regarding the origins of UFOs. The whole business of extraterrestrial origins had been thoroughly explored, so around that time, certain authors such as John Keel, a journalist from New York, and Jacques Vallée, a French astronomer, put forward that these beings came from another dimension. The interdimensional hypothesis sought to connect ufology with all sorts of paranormal themes: ghosts, cryptozoological creatures, premonitions, telepathy, devil's possessions, vampirism, animal mutilations, you name it. According to Keel's book, Operation Trojan Horse, the objective of these UFOs was to confuse us human beings. He said that in reality, UFOs were just a deception which sought to influence and manipulate the collective imagination. And for that reason, many classical ufologists consider Keel as a heretic. For his part, Vallée maintained a paraphysical hypothesis explained in his book Passport to Magonia from 1969. According to this version, aliens from a parallel dimension came here in the UFOs, and the humans who saw their manifestation associated them with other phenomena from popular folklore all over the world, including elves, gnomes, genies, succubus, etc. All of these were embodiments from another dimension that had been adapted to the culture and beliefs of the people who witnessed them. This issue of adapting things to our own belief is actually very interesting. Remember the case of Kenneth Arnold? If you recall, he said that he had seen boomerang-shaped UFOs. But he never mentioned anything about flying saucers, rather that they moved like a saucer skipping over water. Well, the thing is that many journalists misinterpreted the statement and reported that the flying objects were shaped as saucers. This mistake was repeated and amplified hundreds of times by the other media, with the result that later, probably influenced by those outlets, most of the UFO sightings were said to be of saucer-shaped objects.
Coincidence? I think not!
For the skeptics, most people were making up these reports based on erroneous information repeated by the press. Even those Vallée's hypotheses claim that these interdimensional phenomena took the shape of whatever the witness has internalized, since they were manifestations and projections of elements from another dimension.
What a beautiful story.
Yeah.
In later decades, these new ways of understanding the phenomenology as well as its rejections gave birth to multiple religions and sects related to aliens. There are countless examples: the Church of Scientology, the Unarians in California who await the arrival of an alien fleet, the alien movement in France which says that the Elohim alien gods created us via genetic engineering, the Norwegian nation which was founded by a convicted pedophile and in addition to UFOs talks about black racial supremacy. The Typhonian Order derived from the beliefs of Aleister Crowley combined with Lovecraftian themes. The One World Family which mixes the Elohim from the aliens with Christianity and communism. The Figo community in Switzerland founded by Billy Mayer who says that he's in contact with an alien civilization known as the Plejaren. The Chen Tao sect in Taiwan who mixes Buddhism, Taoism and ufology. Or the Heaven's Gate sect whose members committed mass suicide in 1997 because they believed that a passing spaceship would take their souls to another level of existence. And the list just goes on and on and on. Now, where the heck did all these ideas come from? And why are extraterrestrial religions so successful that many of them still endure nowadays? Well, I think in part it's because of the spiritual crisis that the West is currently experiencing, due to the impossibility of finding simple answers that explain our reality either through most Western religions like Christianity, Judaism or Islam, which says that everything was created by an all-powerful God, or else through science, which has grown extremely complicated and thus out of reach for the general public. Many people seek some sort of answer elsewhere, and eventually some people have found answers in aliens. So it seems that if every single historical enigma could be explained via aliens, a lot of people would probably sleep much better at night. And if to that we add the notion that these creatures are seeking some chosen ones to guide humanity towards salvation, then you definitely hit the jackpot, because everyone likes to feel that they are part of something tremendously big and significant. Talking of this, in 1968, Stanley Kubrick premiered his excellent film 2001: A Space Odyssey. In the opening scene, we see an alien artifact endowing some dumb apes with the power of awareness and evolution, but then the next thing we see is basically the episode of Cain and Abel from the Bible, so it's not entirely clear whether it's a gift or a curse. Anyway, when the protagonist David Bowman sets out to find the extraterrestrial civilization, he's swept up by a whirlwind of luminous spheres and ends up in a Rococo-style chamber symbolizing progress and awakening. Bowman is then reborn as a man of a new era, announced by many esoteric gurus, and in fact this is the message that many New Age adepts extract from the whole affair. So in the end, believing in Martians is the same as believing in almost anything else, a matter of faith, except that in this case it's been adapted to new times and new technologies.
I have been chosen. Farewell, my friends. I go on to a better place.
And now pay attention to this. In 1967, the then Secretary General of the United Nations, U Thant from Burma, said that the UFOs were the second most important problem in the world, after the Vietnam War. And as you can probably imagine, this statement caused a huge commotion. The following year saw the publication of the Condon Report, a project carried out by the University of Colorado and financed by the US Air Force in order to study UFOs. The head of this project was physicist Edward Condon, and his conclusion was basically that the notion that aliens were visiting Earth was highly unlikely, and therefore studying these phenomena would be a waste of scientific resources. As a result, Project Blue Book was finally dismantled. With this, we reached the year 1969, when the Apollo 11 mission reached the moon. Neil Armstrong became the first person to ever set foot on our beloved satellite, simultaneously giving rise to plenty of conspiracy theories. For example, that the moon landing was a hoax, recorded at Hollywood studios and directed by Stanley Kubrick, or that there were cuts during the transmission because the astronauts saw humanoid creatures hiding around them and they were edited out by the broadcast. Now we jump forward to 1975 to talk about the case of an American logger named Travis Walton. One evening, after spending his day cutting down trees in Snowflake, Arizona, together with 7 other guys, Walton was on his way back home when he reportedly was abducted by a flying saucer covered in shiny lights. His colleagues informed the police, but this ended up working against them because the cops thought that they had made the whole thing up and accused them of homicide. A search and rescue mission was launched, and after 5 days, Walton appeared next to a phone booth, completely naked, and said that he had indeed been abducted by aliens who had conducted all sorts of strange experiments on him. According to his story, there were some grey aliens who were a bunch of assholes, but thankfully there were other Nordic-looking ones who helped him and finally returned him to Earth. The FBI tried hooking him to a polygraph, and although he failed the first test, it later appeared that he was saying the truth. But as you probably know, these kind of tests are not really reliable. Regardless, the guy made a lot of money with his book The Walton Experience, and also with the subsequent film released in 1993. By the way, this case inspired a psychologist named Susan Clancy to investigate the number of reported abductions in the following days to the broadcast of the documentaries and the films reported to the subject, and she found out that such cases increased by 2,500%. She explained all about this in her new book, which was titled Abducted. Guess she wasn't really inspired that day.
What a coincidence!
Around that time, Steven Spielberg released his iconic Close Encounters of the Third Kind. It was a golden age for ufology, since there was constant talk about aliens and conspiracy theories in the media. One interesting example is Project Serpo, which believed that the events portrayed at the end of the film about a group of humans departing with the aliens like college students during a year abroad was absolutely real. According to this theory, in 1965, the US government agreed to send 12 military officers with the aliens back to their planet of origin, Serpo. Once they arrived, they found out that there was a war going on between different alien races, and even some humans were killed during the mission.
That's the craziest thing I've ever bloody heard.
Cases of UFO collective hysteria were not exclusive to the US. The Soviet Union also had the fair share, but these were far less publicized due to the regime's secrecy. For example, in 1977 we have the Petrozavodsk phenomenon, when hundreds of witnesses saw bright lights moving across the sky. Authorities said that this had been due to the launch of the Cosmos 955 satellite, but that explanation didn't satisfy everyone, including several scientists from the Soviet Academy of Science, who investigated the case but didn't reach any definitive conclusion. There's also Kapustin Yar Soviet rocket range, located near Volgograd in the former Stalingrad. This Soviet secret base was known as the Russian Roswell, or Russian Area 51, since it was believed to have been built around the crashed UFO in order to carry out secret experiments with new weapons created by reverse engineering alien technology. And as you might expect, plenty of UFO sightings were reported in the area around that time.
Madness, mass hysteria, delusion.
Meanwhile, in Spain, there were also several famous UFO cases in the 1970s. For instance, we have the Galdar UFO incident of 1976, which took place in the Canary Islands. And according to the reports, hundreds of eyewitnesses, including the sailors of a Spanish Navy corvette, saw a bright source of light rising up into the sky, followed by a massive red flash. The explanation given was that this had been a test launch of Poseidon missiles by an American submarine which had been conducting NATO maneuvers. But the strangest part of the case is that at the same time, a doctor named Francisco Padrón swore he had seen a transparent sphere floating around with 2 strange creatures inside it, wearing red uniforms while he was riding a taxi.
You don't believe me?
In 1977, there's a story that multiple spaceships landed in Gallarta, near my native region of Vizcaya. Out of it came a group of Martians who explained to a woodworker named Juan Sillero that the Earth was deviating from its orbit, so they wanted to help humanity restore it. Sillero said that he made the aliens 5 times, but both the military and the Ivan Collective, a group of UFO researchers, concluded that it all had been some sort of hoax, and that Sillero suffered psychiatric issues. But perhaps the most famous case was the one which took place in Manises on the 11th of November 1979. In this case, a Spanish airplane flying from Austria to the Canary Islands came across a UFO full of shining and blinking lights, which began to follow it. The pilots freaked out and requested permission to land in Manises Airport in Valencia, while the Air Force dispatched a fighter jet to intercept the UFO. However, the UFO then bust off under the incredulous look of Captain Fernando Cámara. An investigation was conducted, but the Spanish government never gave any details about the event. The rumor said that the lights may have been reflected flares from the combustion towers of the Escombreras refinery, located nearby in Cartagena, but the pilot was adamant that this was impossible. And just to close the issue issue in Spanish UFOs, my own grandfather also said that he had seen one in Puente la Reina in 1960, which is where my mother's family spent their summer vacations. But as far as I know, in this case he was the only witness, so unfortunately there isn't much more to tell.
You are insane, just as your grandfather is insane.
In the late 1970s, a new kind of alien manifestation started to become popular, crop circles or agroglyphs to use the technical term. If you've watched Mel Gibson's film Signs, you'll know what we're talking about. All of a sudden, strange designs started to appear in crop fields all over the world. These were quickly attributed to space landings or interpreted as encrypted messages from extraterrestrials. Regardless, these kinds of markings have actually been showing up for a very long time. It is thought that the first one, known as the Moen Devil, appeared in 1678. It was called that because back then these phenomena, like almost everything out of the usual, were blamed on demons. In the modern age, the first of these phenomena took place in 1966 in Queensland, Australia, but it was in the late 1970s that crop circles began to pop up right, left and center, especially in sunny Britain. Disappointingly, in 1991, artists Doug Bauer and Dave Chorley confessed that they were responsible for most of the circles that appeared in England in the previous decade, more than 200, and they even showed how they managed to make these marks using simple wood planks and some ropes. The thing is that even after the confessions, the number of cases didn't go down. On the contrary, they multiplied. But then again, it's easy to see how many artists would view this as creating beautiful public words, which got plenty of attention from the media, kind of like graffiti. We've now arrived at the two final decades of the 20th century, when the space craze ramped up. For starters, US President Jimmy Carter said that he himself had seen a UFO, and his successor Ronald Reagan mentioned alien invasion several times in his speeches.
Perhaps we need some outside universal threat to make us recognize this common bound. I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world. And yet, I ask you, is not an alien force already among us? What could be more alien to the universal aspirations of our peoples than war and the threat of war?
During the 1980s Christmas season, we have the Rendlesham Forest UFO incident in a town in East England. This is considered the most famous UFO incident occurred in the UK, to the point that it's even referred as the British Roswell. The story goes that a lot of people at that town observed inexplicable lights moving around the sky, and they also said that they saw triangular objects land at a nearby forest. As it turns out, just at the other side of that forest were two military bases, Bentwaters and Woodbridge. A military patrol was sent to inspect the forest just in case an aircraft had crashed or something like that. But what they saw were another bunch of lights moving around very quickly. After the UFO disappeared on the horizon, the patrols examined the site and they said that they found some sort of triangular landing marks as well as plenty of broken branches. The next day they returned to the site and once again saw the lights moving around the sky. Base Commander Charles Holt ordered the patrol vehicles to follow them, and this conversation was recorded in a microcassette device. You can even listen to the whole thing on the corresponding Wikipedia page. The British Ministry of Defense denied that the event was related to a UFO, instead saying that this was all been due to the reflections from a lighthouse located on the coast 8 kilometers away, and the burned ground markings and branches were explained as being caused by foresters who had been working in the area. The explanation baffled many people who considered that they were being taken for fools by a government which was covering up the truth, and so it ended up generating even more noise in the media.
You can't handle the truth!
In Argentina, we have the famous Cerro Uritorco, a place that has been linked to mysterious and esoteric legends, including the appearance of lights in the sky. It seems that, in 1983, a certain Angel Acoglanis said that this was the location of a subterranean alien city called Urx, which according to him, will serve as a refuge when the world-ending cataclysm arrives. Returning to the US in Christmas 1985, a writer named Whitley Strieber said that he had been abducted by extraterrestrials. As he told in his book Communion, published in 1989, he was sleeping peacefully at his home in New York State when he was woken by a group of aliens who took him to the spaceship. He calls them visitors because he doesn't really make it clear whether they come from another world or a different dimension, or maybe they were weird creatures from Earth. But anyway, Strieber said that they conducted all sorts of strange medical experiments on him, gave him a lollipop for being a brave boy and not crying, and then returned him back home. The book was so successful that it was even adapted into a film, with Christopher Walken as a protagonist no less.
Go to hell.
And now we finally reached the topic that all you alien lovers have been waiting for, the famous Area 51. This secret military base, also known as Groom Lake, Dreamland or the Ranch, is located in the state of Nevada, slightly north of Las Vegas, within the Nellis military complex. Obviously, its location is not particularly secret, seeing as everyone knows where it is, but regarding what the heck goes on in there, well, that's a different matter. The most common idea is that the premises of Area 51 are a training and testing field for experimental aircraft. In fact, the base has a gigantic aerodrome, and ever since it began operating back in the 1950s, people nearby have always reported seeing strange lights in the skies. These were most likely test flights, but of course nothing that goes on in there is made public by the US government. In fact, until 1995 they didn't even admit Area 51 existed at all. All of that secrecy, perhaps absurd and exaggerated, had led many conspiracy nuts to believe that the base is used to research UFOs and that they even keep actual aliens there. The more likely truth is that the location was chosen because it's ideal to conduct tests with experimental machinery. It is far away from many large towns, which makes it more private. It has great weather all around the year, and it's easy to supply, run and maintain in working order. The only thing that might have been lacking slightly was the runway, but it was extended, so no problem there either. Back in the day, the place was used to test nuclear devices, and the sector in which the base was built was number 51, thus the name. Some of the tests that we know were conducted there include the Lockheed U-2 aircraft around 1955. This was known as Project Aquatone and was run by the CIA. Later in the 1960s they conducted Project Oxguard, which included the development of the Lockheed A-12 and the SR-71 models, aircrafts that were capable of reaching Mach 3 speeds. In the 1970s we can mention a prototype of stealth aircraft known as Lockheed F-117 Nighthawk. This was a spy plane designed to be invisible to enemy's radar and used to locate defensive systems, command bases and similar sites. In the 1980s the base was rumored to house Project SR-91 Aurora, although this hasn't been fully declassified. This will involve a hypothetical aircraft capable of reaching Mach 5. But what we're interested in took place in 1989, the year when the base exploded in popularity. The key figure in this story was Bob Lazar, a guy who claimed he had worked in Area 51 as a physicist between 1988 and 1989, specifically in Sector 4. After going public, Lazar did an interview with journalist George Knapp on a Las Vegas TV station KLSA-TV. By the way, Knapp was a huge fan of paranormal business and was always featuring some weird thing or another in his program. According to Lazar, the premises at Sector 4 housed a reverse engineering project. They were studying UFOs of extraterrestrial origins in order to learn and apply their technology. Lazar swore that he had seen up to 9 different kinds of flying saucers throughout his time there. He also said that those alien beings had been visiting humanity for at least 10,000 years, and that they were small, grey, and they came from the Zeta Reticuli system. He even explained in detail a theory about how the UFO worked, going into details about their engines and propulsion systems in a way that seems to make sense in connection to many UFO sightings. The main issue here is that the government never recognized him as a former employee, and to make it worse, the 2 universities where Lazar said he had studied, MIT and CIT, have no records of his attendance. Anyway, back to our story. Time passed, the 80s turned into the 90s, and aliens gradually fell out of the limelight. The multiple ufology conventions, which took place in the US, also saw attendance decline year after year. In their place, conspiracy theories began to propagate through the first internet forums, slowly growing and becoming more popular. One of the best known is that of Dulce Base in the New Mexico desert. The story says that it's a subterranean alien base where humans and extraterrestrials collaborate in terrible experiments. The origin of this myth traces back to Paul Benowitz, a former Coast Guard radio engineer in World War II. In the late 70s, he said that he had intercepted a strange conversation from Dulce's base talking about these aliens. It must be said that the guy had been very interested in ufology for a very long time. Sometime later, in 1995, a man named Phillip Schneider reported that he had worked in the base in the 70s, and that he had been an eyewitness of the Dulce's base disaster. Allegedly, in 1976, a group of aliens rebelled against the humans in the underground base, and there was a bloody battle which took the lives of 60 people. If this story sounds vaguely familiar, it's because it's thought to have inspired many famous works, including the video game Half-Life. Another type of alien that became popular at this time were the reptilians, especially after the huge success in the 80s of the TV series V, my favorite as a kid by the way, and also fueled by the Anunnaki theories of Zecharia Sitchin and David Icke. David Icke was an English sport broadcaster who worked at the BBC and also acted as a spokesperson for the Green Party. In 1991, after a medium told him he was destined for a high purpose, he went a bit potty and started saying that he was the descendant of an arcane deity who had informed him that the world would end very soon. The public ridiculed him, but Icke went ahead and published several books in which he refuted the totalitarian ideas of the modern world, and which were also seasoned with plenty of New Age themes. According to Icke, humanity is being controlled by a secret group of reptilians known as the Babylonian Brotherhood. Furthermore, he said that these creatures were shapeshifters, and many famous influential figures were actually reptilians, including Elizabeth II and George Bush. Their purpose was to keep humanity scared in order to feed off the negative energy, which is why they secretly fueled wars and conflicts all over the planet. Personally, I don't think we need any help from aliens. We're perfectly capable of making a mess of things by ourselves. This is quite similar to John Carpenter's film They Live from '88, in which a race of aliens pretend to be humans in order to subjugate us through subliminal messages. All of this craziness served as a breeding ground for a series that we love here at The Rest is History, The X-Files, which premiered in 1993 and was an instant hit. The following year came Stargate, but this one was more about sci-fi adventuring rather than mysterious conspiracy theories. In terms of feature films, we can spend hours talking about the 80s and 90s. Think E.T., The Thing, Alien, Predator, Contact, The Fifth Element, Independence Day, Starship Troopers, Mars Attacks, Men in Black, The Faculty, Species, Extra, and the list goes on and on and on.
It's all lies, but they're entertaining lies.
Now, in terms of sightings, in 1994 we have the aerial school UFO incident in Ruwa, Zimbabwe, when a group of kids saw a flying saucer landing in the schoolyard. Several aliens came out of it and said hello and then departed. Obviously, the kids were hyper excited, and when they were asked to draw what happened, all produced similar results. Another significant event were the Phoenix Lights in Arizona in 1997. On this occasion, thousands of inhabitants witnessed a V-shaped UFO flying over the city. A little bit later, 9 luminous balls were also seen floating around for a while and then became totally still, hanging in the sky for several minutes. Without a doubt, the Phoenix Lights was the UFO case with most eyewitnesses and also the best documented, since the events were recorded by many people. But the US Air Force immediately said that it had all been a military maneuver conducted with a special aircraft, specifically a Fairchild Republic A-10 Thunderbolt, and that the lights were signal flares. All was under control, no reason to worry, nothing special to see here. Come on, move along, sir.
You don't believe in any conspiracy theory? You just think the government's just batting 1,000 and telling us the whole truth?
In recent years, documentary series such as Ancient Aliens have renewed public interest in alien conspiracies, although nowhere near as much as in the 50s and 60s, when these phenomena were followed with great interest and even paranoia. For instance, in 2019 we must mention an assault in Area 51, when thousands of youngsters gathered around the place, running towards the perimeter Naruto style, with a vague notion along the lines of, if we all rush at the same time, they won't be able to stop us. But in the end, nobody had the guts to go all the way. And then we have the business of the Humo and the Humanites. They originated in Spain in the 60s, where several reports began to surface from people who said that they had received messages from a very advanced civilization located in the distant planet of Humo. However, in the mid-1990s, engineer José Luis Jordán Peña admitted that he had made it all up. How disappointing. In a different vein, the Bible translation by Italian Mauro Biglino also followed the line of Sitchin, who is currently in fashion again. But to be honest, his Neo-Anunnaki tales have more plot holes than the Fast and the Furious saga.
Some things you just have to take on faith.
In recent years, the White House has declassified several reports of UFO sightings by military pilots. The first of these was a FLIR infrared video recorded in 2004 by carrier group USS Nimitz while deployed off the southern coast of California. Then in 2014 and 2015 we have the gimbal and go fast video recordings, when UFOs were spotted by combat pilots from the USS Roosevelt while operating in the eastern coast of the USA. This pretty much forced the American government to officially admit the existence of UFOs. However, let's make something very clear. A UFO doesn't necessarily entail aliens, but simply what the name describes, an unidentified flying object. What also became very clear is that the Pentagon takes the issue of possible aerial threats extremely seriously, whatever their origin. And in order to address this, they created the AITIP, or Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. In addition, the SCTI initiative, or Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, has been scoring our heavens for decades, using the most advanced radio telescopes in search for an alien signal. Please notice that all the devices seeking intelligent life point away from Earth. That says a lot. And finally, this year, UFOs were back in the limelight after alleged Chinese balloon spy probes were shot down. However, many people believe that it was all a smokescreen. Could it be that we're about to hear a public declaration about the existence of creatures from another world who have been visiting our planets for decades? Nobody really knows, but perhaps we will soon.
And the rest is history. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave us a big like. Take care, and I'll see you in the next video.